Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my 5 advanced fantasy recommendations video. So this is the last video in this series. It is going out a couple of weeks later than I had intended, but that's okay. I don't think that anybody has really been waiting on tenterhooks for this. I do have a couple of things that I think that probably belong on here, but I did leave off, but I said that I was going to do 5. For once, I'm actually sticking to 5. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into it. All right, I'm going to get the obvious out of the way. The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This is one of my favorite series of all time. I have finally caught all the way up, and I read Rhythm of War earlier this year. I absolutely adored it. However, the Stormlight Archive as an entry into the Cosmere and as a series as a whole is incredibly complex, and I just don't think that it's something that can wholly be appreciated. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there are plenty of people that have jumped right into this and maybe they don't have a lot of experience reading fantasy that are perfectly fine with it. But I do think that it helps with the experience, and it helps you enjoy it a little bit more if you have a familiarity with all of the things that it does different in the fantasy genre than a lot of other books that are similar. Is there anything really similar to Stormlight Archive? I think the answer to that's mostly no. This is a series that I always have a very difficult time explaining what it's about. Essentially, this first book, you follow Kaladin. Kaladin is a slave. He is being sent off to the war front, essentially. In this world, there is a war going on between the Alethi and between the Parshendi. And I don't really want to go too far into that because, again, complexity, world building, all of that stuff. But essentially, Kaladin is being sent to the war front as a slave. This is kind of a last-ditch effort for a lot of slaves and criminals. They are sent to the war front to become bridge runners. And this means that they are tasked with picking up these large wooden bridges as a team or a group and running them across what is a kind of sea of plateaus. It's very difficult to describe to you, but essentially there's a lot of places with crevices and holes in it, and the army has to use these bridges to get across, and the slaves are tasked with carrying the bridges that they then run across to get them to the war front. This is very dangerous. Many of them die. You are not expected to live a very long life if you are a bridge runner. And Kaladin's pretty much done. He's depressed. He's ready to go. But something keeps happening, and he keeps living, and he doesn't really understand why. And it's just amazing. The world building in this is amazing. The magic system in this is entertaining. This recommendation is not going to come as a surprise to literally anybody that has ever watched any of my videos, or anybody familiar with fantasy releases, because The Way of Kings, the Stormlight Archive, has been a staple of fantasy for many, many years now. It is still ongoing. We are waiting for Stormlight 5. But in the meantime, there are 4 books out in this series, and if you've looked at all of my other videos and you think that you're ready for this, absolutely give it a shot, because The Way of Kings is phenomenal. The next book that I have on my list is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. So this is the first in, I think it's going to be a trilogy. I don't think there's going to be more than that. 2 of these books are out so far. This is another series that is slightly difficult to describe, but it's because of the complexity of the character work that I think makes it a contender for an advanced fantasy series. Marie Brennan and Alice Helms comprise this writing duo of M.A. Carrick. They are both seasoned fantasy writers, and they have created a masterpiece, in my opinion. This follows mostly Ren, who is a con artist. She has returned to this particular country. I'm not going to throw all of the names at you, but she has returned to this country under the guise of being the long-lost daughter of a very wealthy household. She thinks that it will probably be a relatively easy trick to slide in and try and become a member of this family and partake in their wealth. She doesn't know that she has chosen the pretty much worst household to do this, because they are hiding the fact that they are broke and broken from the inside. Nobody else knows about this, but as she starts to ingratiate herself into this family, she does start to really endear herself to them, and they endear themselves to her as well, and she really starts to care for them. The magic systems, while not necessarily complex, there's a couple of different ones, and you kind of just have to accept them for what they are. One is extraordinarily more difficult to wrap my head around than the other. Maybe other people don't have that issue. The politics that are going on in the background are peak fantasy ballroom politics. It's a delight from beginning to end. The second book, The Liar's Knot, is one of my favorite reads of this entire year. You've also got a little bit of a Robin Hood kind of situation going on, where there is this masked superhero-esque person who runs around and saves people. They're practically an urban legend at this point, and you don't know who it is, and that's a little bit of the mystery because you're constantly trying to figure out who was under that hood. And yeah, it's just a delight. I absolutely adore this, but there are some pieces of the plot that just get extraordinarily complex or slow-moving, and those are some things that you just might not appreciate as much if you're not used to reading this type of fantasy. I don't think that this recommendation is going to come as a surprise to anybody, but the Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin, yes, I know I'm holding up book 2. I don't actually know if we've ever owned book 1. I'm pretty sure that book 2 we have and was borrowed from my father-in-law, and that's why it's here. I never actually finished the entire Game of Thrones series, so take all of this with a grain of salt. But the Song of Ice and Fire series, beginning with the first book of Game of Thrones, is well known for being extraordinarily complex in terms of the number of players and characters that are in it. There is obvious politicking going on all around. I'm not going to go into the plot with you guys. We all kind of have an idea of the plot of Game of Thrones, right? I mean, at this point, between all of the TV show stuff that's going on and then the books being out for as long as they have. So there's so many characters to keep track of. It's even difficult to keep track of them in the visual medium, honestly, in my opinion, in the Game of Thrones TV show. It was harder for me to keep track of them in the actual books without, a face to put to the name. And I think that that is something that lends itself to, if you're much more used to trying to keep track of these complex character maps and worlds and all of that stuff, that might help you in understanding as you read through The Song of Ice and Fire. Now, like I said, I did only make it through book 2, so take this recommendation with a grain of salt, not because I didn't like it, but just because it kind of felt like a lot of work to me to try and wrap my head around all of it. I actually much preferred watching the TV show until the end, the series ending that we don't talk about. In terms of complexity, I do think that the Song of Ice and Fire really does belong on this list, but I think that if it sounds anything like what you would enjoy, or if you liked the TV show, up until a certain point, then I think that it's definitely worth giving the books a shot. My next recommendation that I'm going to put on this list is the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan and then finished by Brandon Sanderson. So I have read at least half of this series previously. I have been trying to, you can see my bookmark, I have been trying to get back into it so that I can once again start reading through and then hopefully finish it now that it is all completed. But The Eye of the World is the first book in the Wheel of Time. And again, this is probably something that if you have been active in the fantasy genre for any length of time, especially recently now that the TV show is coming out, you've heard of this before. I think that in terms of fantasy, while the prose is not necessarily difficult to get into or difficult to read, I do think that it is a little bit of an older style, especially in the beginning, and I think that that lends itself to, you just need an appreciation for the genre before you really dive into this. I think that a lot of people go into Eye of the World expecting something a little bit more modern and don't realize when it was written necessarily, and that kind of throws them off when they start to go into this, and it does have a slightly older type of prose. The magic system there's a lot going on. Once again, you're following several different characters, and as you progress through the series, they progress down many different paths that you also have to keep track of. And I think that that is something that is much easier to do when you're used to being able to do it, which is why I do think that this belongs in the advanced fantasy section. Obviously, if you are new to fantasy and you've heard all about this and you would like to give it a try, definitely give it a shot. But those are things that you do need to prepare yourself before you get into reading this as a series. And once again, this is not something that I have finished, so again, take this recommendation with a grain of salt, but I have enjoyed up to book 5 or 6 at this point. I think that I might have given up around book 6 or 7 when I read this the last time, but they weren't all out yet, so I wasn't quite motivated to just binge all of them as I am now. So I will be giving this another shot. Like I said, I am partway through the Wheel of Time, and I will be reading the series again, but I do know that I have loved the majority of what I have read of this series, and it is a very good recommendation if any of that sounded interesting to you. I'd like to put a caveat and say that I don't necessarily love the TV show. There are some changes that I think they made for the better, there are some changes that I think they made for the worse, but overall, my feelings on the TV show are relatively lukewarm. I have one last recommendation for this list, and that is the Lycanius Trilogy by James Islington. This is originally self-pub, and then I think he got picked up by Orbit, and it is a 3-book series. Obviously, it's a trilogy, I said that. I have only read the first book. John, however, has read through book 2, and we both think that it kind of puts itself into the advanced fantasy category as well, because a lot of this is very Sanderson-esque, if I'm being perfectly honest. I don't think that I like this as much as anything that I have read by Sanderson, but what I did read, which was this first book, was really, really good. Essentially, in this book, you follow Davian, and Davian finds out that he has the power of augurs, which is forbidden. I believe that all of the gifted in this world, anybody that has any kind of magic power, are controlled. They are forced to go to specific schools, and they are under the oversight, the very strict oversight of people that are in charge of them. But augurs specifically are banned, and Davian finds out that he has the powers of one. It kind of sets in a whole chain of events that takes place, and it is epic in scope. James Islington has built a massive world that even in book 2 you are still trying to figure out everything that is going on. The world building is really complex. The magic system is not necessarily complex, but is lending itself to more things, but is definitely a lot deeper than you really think it is at surface level when you start reading this, and you learn more about it as you progress through the book, and apparently, as John says, into the second book as well, you're still learning the scope of this entire plot and world that James Islington has built. While I think that it's very good, and while I don't think that the prose itself isn't very complex to follow or understand, I do think that this belongs in the advanced fantasy category just because there's so much going on all the time. There is a very Sanderlanche-esque moment at the end, apparently of both books, according to John. I definitely noticed it at the end of this first one, and I think that it belongs in this category right next to the Stormlight Archive. Alright, so there you guys have my 5 advanced fantasy recommendations. Obviously, you're more than welcome to disagree with me in the comments, or let me know if you have any other things that you think should be on this list. Like I said, I did leave off a couple or switch a couple out that I thought could go on there, but I did want to stick to actually 5 for once because I haven't in my other 2 videos. And that's it for this one. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out my channel. Down in the description box are links to my Goodreads, my Twitter, and my Instagram in case you guys wanted to follow me on any of those. But that's it for me today, guys, so I'll talk to you in my next one. Bye!